जन्नत से तशरीफ लाया है ना, जिनकी बरकत से रोशन मेरे सुबह शाम, जिनके नाना सब अम्बिया के माँ, उस हुसैन इब्ने हैदर पे लाखों सलाम।
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of News in Focus live on Radio Al Ansar International, broadcasting on the frequency Durban 90.4 FM, Peter Maritzburg 105.6 FM, and audio streaming on www.alansar.org.za. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhawa bikum. My name is Yunus Sekur and I'll be in your company for the next 2 hours, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. I will be interviewing our guests shortly. Today, the date is the 24th of July, 2024, equivalent to the 18th of Muharram al-Haram, 1446 AH. On tonight's show, we have quite an interesting program. As usual, we'll get further updates on the functioning of the government of the national unity. We'll interview some guests shortly. And there's been a request from many tenants and indeed landlords to talk about the rights and obligations of residential tenant and landlord. And with me in the studio to discuss these issues, because lots of tenants have raised concerns in the flats in and around Durban and the different areas, and many of them are facing challenges with landlords, particularly with increase in rentals, and a lot of them are unemployed and they don't know which way to go when they can't afford the rentals. So we have Dr. Syed Iqbal Muhammad. He's the chairman of the Organization of Civic Rights. This organization has been in operation for many a decade, and I know when I was the head of human settlements in the municipality, I interacted regularly with Dr. Syed Iqbal Muhammad, and whenever we wanted to implement any rental increases, although our rentals were quite low in the municipality, Iqbal always came in and said, people cannot afford, you can't increase. And yet the rentals there were probably 20% of what the market was charging. But so verbose he was about the rights of tenants. And indeed, he dealt with the landlords. Iqbal also spent many years with the Rental Housing Tribunal. It's a government organization. And he interacted with tenants and landlords through that particular forum to ensure that tenants are not exploited, but also he protected the rights of landlords. So Iqbal will share with us some of his experiences, what he's there for, and those tenants that are listening to us that are facing challenges. Iqbal's offices are open. It's a non-profit organization, and they don't charge anything for the services. They've been doing this work for many a year, and in addition to being involved with OCR, Iqbal is also a civic activist as well. So he also deals with civic rights throughout the country. I also have Dr. Faisal Suleiman. He's the president of Islamic Medical Association, also a political and civic activist. And he will chat to us because he's recently been appointed as president of IMA as to the activities and the vision of IMA now that he's become the president. And they're having a convention in the mother city of Cape Town on the 10th of 11th, but on the 8th and 9th, they'll be having a council meeting as well, and some interesting discussions that are going to take place. He's going to chat about that. Later in the program, we'll chat to our resident economist, Hassan Mutala, on the economic impact of the GNU and how is the GNU functioning. But around about 10 or 15 minutes time, I will be interviewing Professor Andre Duvanaga. He's a political analyst, and he's got his ears on the ground in terms of, are we really going to have a successful GNU? So he will give us his vision there. The show is interactive and we welcome your comments, which can be sent to us on the studio WhatsApp number 060-904-1056. Unfortunately, we might not have time for calls, so please do so if you want to contact us via the WhatsApp line. But for the next 10 minutes, I just want to chat to Dr. Faisal Suleiman on the issue of IMA, and he's indeed going to chat later about the GNU as well, because he's been quite in contact with the government institutions in this regard, so he'll give us some expert information there. Faisal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you and Iqbal and the listeners. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. I know you have a very, very busy day, having your practice in KwaMashu for more than about 25 years there, and at the same time being the president of IMA and involved in various other activities, including president of SAMNet. And I know when SAMNet was formed, we were involved back in the day and there was a vision you had, and you carrying that out together with your team and ensuring you respond to issues that come up from time to time, particularly on the issue of how the Zionists are creating havoc in Gaza and what have you, and lots of other issues. So Faisal, just to kick off today's discussion, having now becoming the president of IMA, and we know Islamic Medical Association deals with the Islamic issues relative to the medical profession, and a lot of Muslim doctors are linked to IMA. When you got in, there was a vision, but obviously you would have looked at the vision and decided whether you need to change the thinking of IMA, not only medical, but looking at other issues as well, because I know IMA indeed has got a big stake at Ahmad Al-Qadi Hospital, but maybe that's been lessened now. But your organization has been instrumental in ensuring that, the Muslim team is enriched when dealing with the medical profession in terms of how the Islamic Sharia should apply. So perhaps you just want to give us a brief overview of the vision and anything relevant that you want our listeners to know about IMA.
Sure. Thanks, Yunus. So, some 45 years ago, IMA was started under a different name, Lajnatul Itaba, by a group of doctors in Durban who, during the height of apartheid, saw the lack of facilities, in particularly what would have been referred to as the African or black townships in those days. And it was started primarily as an organization providing free social welfare and medical treatment to impoverished communities. It started at As-Salam and it expanded Marian Hill, Malagazi. We have quite a few clinics now. And, with the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I suppose dedication of those early founders, it has grown. And that still continues. The range of clinics is now national. And the scope of what was only medical now, we have proper fully paid full-time nurses. We have, dentals in some places. We have many of our clinics have full-time optometry services. So that has expanded. One of the earlier thinkings initially for many years, the founding fathers were very against taking money from any drug companies. So for many years, it perhaps stunted the growth, but perhaps during the apartheid era and whatever else it was, for a good 25 years of its existence, IMA didn't take money from any of the drug companies. It was partly the thought of perverse incentives or whatever. And clearly, without money, you cannot build structures, all of that. But the charitable side has expanded to the point where, we now have a frail care facility in Sherwood as well. We do a lot of renal dialysis now, and of course, our medical shows. The IMA Medical File now, hosted in this studio, but now goes national on 7 radio stations. And like that, so the medical facilities have improved, the nursing facilities improved. Baitul Noor now has full-time counseling, aids, all of these things. So alhamdulillah, that has grown. What hasn't grown is membership. We're about 2,500 doctors, which I think can be much more. And the younger generation aren't joining in a lot. And partly we think it's because the vast majority of people don't really know what we do. We're now at that stage where for me, and we have our council meeting in 10 days' time, and that's where these discussions will take place. But I would propose to the council that at the moment IMA is seen as charity. The reasons for its existence, the raison d'etre is charity. I would like us to move to a point where it is seen as a professional medical body, and charity is a huge component of it, but it is not is not what defines the IMA only. And I think advocacy, and we've done a lot of that. I mean, during COVID, working with ulama groupings, advice on. In fact, we will release. Dr. Sabiha Dawood is just has just written today. I have to just go and start putting it out. A whole public advisory on the monkeypox. So inshallah, that should come out in a day or two, an advisory to the public. Similarly with vaccines, working with, so we get a lot of these questions on medication, the ethics, etc. We also have taken on an advocacy role in terms of doctors' rights, patient rights, We were, clearly we said that we believe with the Gaza genocide, for example. The Tiva is a company, a drug company that's based in Israel, that IMA endorses the boycott of Tiva and Discam as part of the broader BDS. So that has been, and then of course our members have been involved in the marches and whatever else. So in that respect, the advocacy has grown, the public relations part of it has grown. But I think we will attract younger members when we're seen as a professional organization who's not just only involved in charity. Clearly, charity is the significant part of what we do, but we need to expand that part of the IMA. Interestingly, Yunus, on a few days ago, we hosted a Turkish group, the Turkish-Palestinian group that do the Waqf for Al-Quds. So they run Waqfs, and this is how they maintain Al-Quds. So when you visit Masjid Al-Aqsa, the Masjid Al-Compound, everything there, the maintenance is done through these groups, through a Waqf. And then I looked at that and I said, we need to start an IMA Waqf legacy. In the recent past, we lost two of our stalwarts, Dr. Rawat in Klerksdorp, Dr. Yaqub Isek in Johannesburg. These were, stalwarts of the organization who passed on. Nobody passes on unexpectedly, but these were quite sudden. And had we had a Waqf in place, I think you would have seen something. So I'm quite, after listening to these people on Monday, quite keen. Also at the council meeting, I intend to propose an IMA Waqf, a proper Waqf done very professionally, where doctors now getting on in age, etc., can start to look at leaving a legacy Waqf. The other big project at the moment, as I'm sure everybody knows, Yunus, Gaza is rubble. There's literally nothing left. So we are working through FEMA, and I'll speak about FEMA, but with doctors in the UK who've started it. In fact, one brother in Cape Town who's built an entire platform to teach for online lectures for the medical students in Gaza. We have now 22 sponsored by Gift of the Givers, who are finally medical students who are at UCT doing the electives. You have to go to hospitals. Of course, as we know, there's nothing for them to do there. So at this stage, we are starting to work on online lectures, developing these lectures. There's a cardiologist in Johannesburg, Dr. Vachiat, who's driving this. And we're working, collaborating, of course, with our colleagues all over the world. The second part of it is they are also in discussion with WITS to say, we'd like the other students to come to WITS as well. There's need for hundreds of them. So this would be undergraduate at the moment. But of course, there's postgraduate studies that need to take place. As we know, the doctors were deliberately targeted, ambulance drivers, all healthcare facilities and healthcare personnel. So this is part of a deliberate collective punishment. But we need to now start planning for, inshallah, when this madness and these massacres stop and those soldiers leave and the bombs stop being dropped on civilians, for the rebuilding of the medical part of that. So that's a exciting but also a challenging project. Amputees, I mean, I don't have to tell you, after all of this bombing, the number of amputees that are people who've lost limbs in Gaza. So that would be something that we would be keen to get involved, as well as the IMA, where we have the facilities here. We have, as you say, the likes of Al-Qadi and other hospitals where Muslims have stakes in, that will be talking to say, let's find a subsidized cost or whatever. If through Home Affairs, Department of Home Affairs, we'll need DIRCO, all of this involved, to bring these people to be able to rehabilitate them, get them limbs, and take them back. That'll need funding. It'll need a lot of coordination between Home Affairs, DIRCO. As you know, people have lost passports, they've lost their degrees. This wasn't just random. They bombed even, like the equivalent of your SASA offices deliberately, where the birth certificates and records are kept deliberately. So people in those Palestinians have no proof of anything. Someone can say, I'm a doctor, but there's no proof of it. So there's a lot to be done from our perspective, and clearly we have an ethical and a moral duty to do so. So that's two of perhaps the ongoing new projects that IMA will be looking at. And of course, we're always looking to expand our renal dialysis. There's a huge need in our country because of the mess in government or in the state sector. So that is expanding, alhamdulillah. And then we started the IMA bursary project this year. We funded 13 students, medical, health sciences. So that's growing as well.
Yeah, shukran for that introduction, Faisal, and some very important, comments you've made there regarding the Waqf Fund and the assistance to be rendered to Gaza, the humanitarian aid, etc. We'll continue with the discussion after the break, because we take a break and then we'll interview Prof. Duvanaga, and then I want to bring Iqbal in on a couple of issues, but inshallah we'll continue with the discussion after the break.
Looking for a way to deepen your spiritual journey? Join us on Urban Woman Monday to Thursday, right after the 10 a.m. news. Together we'll complete the Holy Quran, one meaningful session at a time. Don't miss out. Tune in, inshallah, and transform your mornings with us.
Welcome to Simplex Radio. Visit our showroom for the full range of car audio. Our TV department carries top brands with quality LED panels, full HD to Ultra HD, and now the experience of Super Ultra HD. Visit our theater rooms and transform your home with brands like Onkyo, Integra, Denon, Boston Acoustics, Yamaha, and more for quality audio visual experience. Now available, full range of home appliances. A one-stop shopping experience. Call 031 306 4029 or Kenilworth Park, 202 Brickfield Road, Overport. Simplex Radio, the name you can trust.
Almost 1 in 5 South African children attend school each day without having eaten breakfast. This seriously affects their ability to concentrate and understand lessons. The Al-Imdad Foundation's Make Breakfast Possible campaign allows learners to enjoy a high-energy cereal at the start of the school day. Help children to focus on learning and not hunger. Let's make breakfast possible today. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Radio Al Ansar, Durban, 90.4 FM, Peter Maritzburg, 105.6 FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to News in Focus live on Radio Al Ansar International, broadcasting on the frequency Durban 90.4 FM, Peter Maritzburg 105.6 FM, streaming on www.alansar.org.za. Before the break, we were chatting with Dr. Faisal Sulaiman, who gave us some interesting information on the workings of the IMA and the assistance they're rendering to various communities, humanitarian aid. But with me on the line, I've got Professor Andre Duvanaga. Andre, good evening and welcome to News in Focus live on Radio Al Ansar International.
Good evening. Nice talking again.
No, thanks for joining us. I know I watch you quite often on TV talking about various aspects of the government, but what we want to chat today, and sorry I missed you last week, I think we tried calling you too late. My subject today is an update on the Government of National Unity. Now this morning I was hearing, or sometime during the day, President Ramaphosa talking about the presidential budget and the priorities and why there's a need for some of the portfolios to be located in the president's office so that he keeps a close watch. So perhaps you want to comment on, I'm not sure whether you listened to portions of the speech, but lots of other political parties were highly critical that why certain portfolios are located in his office. So perhaps you want to just give us some input in that regard, Prof.
Yes, I also have huge concerns about the process that we can describe as centralization. In other words, when a system is becoming more and more dysfunctional, you are centralizing power to a certain point. And what we are seeing is where systems are becoming dysfunctional, they end up in the presidency. And the presidency will oversee this. Now, there's a number of problems with this. One is the democratic structure. When it comes to democracy, you are supposed to decentralize power, or the principle we call the devolution of power. Also, when it comes to administrative system, the chief in charge of any institution cannot control everything. They can function in a governance way in order to have an oversight function with regard to certain structures. But to put it under the direct control of the presidency is problematic. Now, the background to this is that the systems are dysfunctional. We have seen with electricity, when Eskom is dysfunctional, we ended up with a minister of electricity in the presidency. When intelligence seems to be dysfunctional or working in opposition with the president after the 2021 violence in KZN, it ended up somewhere in the presidency. So to me, this is a symptom of a dysfunctional system. It's a symptom of a democratic system that is not working the way it is supposed to work, and the cabinet that is becoming dysfunctional because the cabinet as an institution has an oversight function, and the cabinet should function under the leadership of the president. Oh, loop. Hello? Sir, you just disappear. I cannot hear you. Hello? I cannot hear you. I made the analysis, and after stopping, you were gone.
Yes, Prof, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay,
now.
we had a slight technological problem here. You were chatting about the centralization of certain functions like the Minister of Electricity and others falling under the presidency. And you mentioned this is not healthy for democracy. Obviously, there are valid reasons why the president decided to locate these functions in his office, and he explained why. But I thought, let's just change the subject slightly. The government of national unity has been in place for a couple of weeks, if not more than a month. And the parties that form the GNU, they've been given certain portfolios. Some may say these were not the most important portfolios, but having said that, some of them became deputy ministers in some important portfolios like finance and others. What's your take on the functioning? Do you think, it will slowly improve service delivery in terms of all the challenges we had in the past few years?
Well, I think the whole concept of a government of national unity is a challenging thing for South Africa at the moment. And I'm going to motivate it against the backdrop of major political, economic, and social challenges the country as a country is facing, emphasizing the need for strong leadership, for strong governance, and for strong administration and management. So we need a government that can really take us forward. But we know what was the end result of the election, and I'm not going to elaborate on this, but the end result was the necessity of some sort of coalition working together in order to obtain democratic majorities. And the ANC opened it up for all governments, for all parties to become part. And we must be honest by saying that some of these marriages, because this is a complicated marriage with about 10 parties plus involved. So this is a complicated thing. And what the ANC did was to select the most important portfolios for their own control, and they gave away some of the lesser important portfolios, and balancing them. For example, agriculture under the leadership of John Steenhuisen, the former the DA leader, but putting it against the only member of parliament of the PAC as his deputy, with a completely different view about life and politics and society and land reform, etc., etc. So this is making the picture very complicated. And we have seen that there were a number of motions of no confidence in the government of national unity. I'm not talking about the parliamentary processes. I'm talking about the general interpretation of that. And we have seen some leaders even projecting that this may end up in a failure after a year or two. My take on it is, in short, the following. It is probably the best solution we have for the current situation in South Africa. By no means is this an ideal scenario, but it is a lot better than, let's say, a coalition among parties like the ANC, the MK, the EFF. And I can motivate that politically, economically, and socially. But the fact of the matter is there is criticism against the government of national unity. They face a number of obstacles. I believe they are going to face it in the near future yet again. And I think, and I'm going to mention a few important challenges for the government of national unity. One challenge is going to be the leadership of Ramaphosa. Can Ramaphosa really take the leadership in these difficult circumstances? Secondly, how are they going to deal with difficult ideological issues, referring to things like, for example, land reform, things like how to grow the economy? What role should we give to the private sector in this regard? International relations, should we align with the West in terms of what seems to be a build-up to a third world war, or should they align to the Russia, China, Iran, Palestinian alliances that are developing and the new BRICS grouping? These are major challenges, and it's highly likely that they are not going to find consensus. Another big issue for the government of national unity will be the implementation of the findings of the Zondo Commission and action against corruption. And taking all of this into consideration, my take is that it's going to take big steps on the next level. As Albert Einstein said, you cannot resolve a conflict on the same level it exists. You need to go to the next level. And we must go to the next level as a country to address these issues. And this will mean huge compromises. And already we have seen a lot of negative reaction coming from the side of within the ANC or the ANC family, thinking about the SACP, COSATU, Panjasa Lessufi in Gauteng, and so on.
I think very interesting is that some political parties are not happy with Ramaphosa's super presidency, where they've indicated that, you know, he's creating a super presidency concentrated on his office. Although he has 3 portfolios linked to him as opposed to 4 in the previous administration, because the Ministry of Electricity and Energy is now standalone ministry. You mentioned that obviously, you know, will Ramaphosa manage? Now, critics are of the view, or certain analysts, that, you know, he's the ideal person for this situation, having been the leader as part of CODESA back in the days, and a level-headed individual. And he obviously read the script that this is the best solution of what's available. So I think the other political parties that are part of this whole GNU would also be wary of that. There's going to have to be compromises. Obviously, certain issues like the implementation of the Zondo Commission, dealing with corruption, maladministration, is a must, because that's what brought the ANC down. Your comments on those issues, Prof?
It's a complicated answer. It's not a yes or a no. It's probably a yes and a no. Yes, Ramaphosa is a negotiator, when it comes to coalition politics, we need what they call in the business literature a transactional type of leadership. He has that personality. So in that sense, he is the right person for the job. And also, he's the only real leader at the moment within the ANC that will be prepared to build an alliance towards the Democratic Alliance and some other groupings. The other leaders will go probably other ways or aligned with more radical leaders. We see that currently in the Gauteng province with the working together between the EFF and the ANC, and maybe even the MK party and also Action South Africa, which is in the mix there. So there's no doubt Ramaphosa is a central figure within this government of national unity. But taking it to the other level, and I'm going to mention only a few things. After 2019, we had the era of Ramaphoria, which really didn't materialize. And many people, even some of my colleagues, talk about Ramaphosa playing the long game. But at the end of the day, the game was a complete failure. And his first term as president can be described as a failure if you measure this in terms of critical political, economic, and social criteria. I'm not going into detail into these matters. But the fact is there are severe criticism. Then again, there's the Phala Phala case arising again. And we also know that a huge number of ANC people are implicated by the Zondo Commission or other forms of misconduct or acts of corruption or nepotism or whatever you would like to call it. And if there is strong action, and that was part of the compromise between the parties within the government of national unity to enforce law and the rule of law principles and to take action against corruption. That was part of the bigger framework. There were other things also. But if they are taking this action, there are going to be reaction coming from the ANC. And
Prof,
my huge concern
yes,
is that Ramaphosa is not strong enough for this.
Well, listen, time will tell, because we're not sure whether there's anyone else in the political arena who can hold this portfolio other than Ramaphosa. Because we looked, when you and I discussed who are the possible presidential candidates, and we couldn't come up with any. So let's hope that, after a year we see some, light at the end of the tunnel. And due to, the various parties compromising, that the intention will be, as Ramaphosa said in his speech, that to improve service delivery for the people of South Africa, to deal with the challenges that the government failed in the last few years or whatever, last decade. And after a year, we'll be able to measure. Prof, I must thank you for joining us. I know I wanted to chat with you about KZN, the Provincial of National Unity, and how that's working. It's also got its own challenges, but maybe on another occasion we'll chat on that. Thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you everything of the best for the future.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good night. That was Professor Andre Duvenage. I want to bring Brother Dr. Syed Iqbal Muhammadi now. He's been sitting in the studio quite patiently. And Iqbal, I know that you know a lot about, the situation of tenants' rights and landlords. But recently in the Overport area, the Al Ansar Foundation provides a lot of relief to people living in the flats in and around Overport. And there's a large number of flats. And I know that you've been dealing with lots of these flats, both in Sparks Road, Brickfield Road, etc. And a lot of other, individuals have been raising concerns about rental increases. Rents are too high. So when we conducted a survey as Al Ansar in recent months to establish what relief we can provide for tenants living in these flats, we discovered that a lot of them are grantees and basically pensioners. And they can ill afford food, having the commitment of the rentals. And average rental, even though some of the landlords in this area are charging rentals like 3,500, 4,000, 5,000, gone are the days of the 1,500 and 2,000. I know in the backyards people pay that, What have been your observations in terms of tenants complaining that they cannot afford rentals, and how do you deal with those challenges, Iqbal?
Assalamu alaikum.
And welcome to Radio Al Ansar.
Shukran for having me. Yeah, I think, during COVID and post-COVID, the situation obviously has become worse, especially for pensioners and for poor tenants who are unemployed. The interesting thing is that way back in 1998,
Pre-apartheid, that was.
Pre-apartheid, no, it was
Post-apartheid, couple of years into apartheid.
Yes, newly formed,
Yes.
democratic government. We met with the then Minister of Human Settlement, Sankey Mahanyele, and we proposed this idea of a new legislation, because at that stage we still had the Rent Control Act. And within a year, alhamdulillah, we then saw changes. As the Organization of Civic Rights, we were part of the process of changing the legislation, and hence the government introduced the Rental Housing Act. One of the things we agreed with the minister then was that rent control should be abolished. While it provided some kind of protection to tenants, in reality, it didn't really protect tenants who were experiencing, problems with rentals at that stage. So part of the agreement was that the new government would subsidize rental of struggling tenants. And if you look at the Rental Housing Act, which is the law for residential tenancy in the country, in the preamble, it makes a reference to, government making subsidy available, or and something to that regard. And so decades later, subsidy has never been introduced. So one of the
in
ways...
the pre-apartheid era, there were subsidies from my recollection.
Yes. So the agreement was that abolish rent control, introduce a new legislation which is fair to both, property owners and tenants, provide protection to tenants, but in the same way also to protect the rights of property owners, landlords, and landowners. So the act is a very powerful act, the Rental Housing Act. However, the rental housing tribunals in each province that deals with the conflict and so on, and often have to deal with rental arrears. And part of what the tribunal should have done, and they haven't done, is to compile information regarding tenants who are really facing difficulty in terms of meeting their rental commitments, because that in turn would inform the National Ministry of Human Settlements to look at the kind of subsidy or intervention that's required. So to date, that hasn't happened. So I can understand, with the feedback that you've got through your survey, that tenants are struggling. Now, we work with a number of buildings, including old age homes. And it's I don't think one can really grasp the level of suffering that indigent, poor, struggling tenants, pensioners are facing. And given our economic situation, well, in this country and also globally, it's only going to get worse.
So it's extreme hardship for tenants, particularly those who are pensioners and grantees.
Absolutely. And then you need to look at that in the context of where the landlady or landlord is just basically struggling to survive and using this rental income to supplement his or her livelihood and so on. And then you have a tenant who cannot pay. And you have this struggling property owner who's relying on the rental, or at least most of that rental, to probably service the bond or whatever the situation is. So
It's a no-win situation.
No-win situation, and it's impacting really hard on
Well,
struggling property owners as well.
I'm going to wear my rental cap when we were discussing these issues back in the days, and I haven't forgotten the philosophy behind it, because when we met with Department of National Human Settlements in Pretoria, there was certain housing policies that were in place, and one of the policies was they wanted this low-cost housing to be constructed so people don't pay rentals. But that was limited in its application in the sense that the government wanted to abolish rental housing schemes like what happened in Chatsworth and Phoenix, because those were highly subsidized and the rentals were fairly low and affordable. But I mentioned at the preamble that even then too there were problems. People couldn't afford it. Then they came out with what we call the Social Housing Act, and that culminated in developing rental housing again. And the purpose of that particular project, which still takes place now, is for social housing institutions to construct through a subsidy program rental housing units, of which a large portion is affordable or subsidized. So let's assume a unit is constructed maybe for an average cost of 300,000 per unit, a 2-bedroom unit in whichever area, and a social housing institution gets the subsidy, plus they got to find the balance through a bank loan. Then the portion of the subsidy for that particular construction reduces the rental. For the normal rental would be $4,000. They will pay probably $1,500 based on their income. And it's applicable to people below the 5,000 income limit. So those that are earning like 1,800 and 2,000 grants, they would now pay a lower rental. There was also another concept of community residential units, but unfortunately the eThekwini municipality has not implemented those programs effectively. And a lot of those programs were benefiting certain communities. I'm not going to mention which communities, but you're aware of it. And a lot of the non-African communities were deprived of housing opportunities, for the last 10 years, which now brought about this problem you're facing. So I know we've got 3 minutes before the news break. Perhaps you just want to comment the intention of that and why has it failed? Is it because of lack of funding or lack of developers?
Yeah, I think while the intention was really laudable, in terms of social housing, and I think if you look at the social housing institutes around the country, most of them are struggling.
In fact, they failed.
They've collapsed for a number of reasons.
Correct.
And we're not going to go into those reasons. But except for one very important thing is that here again, despite the subsidy, tenants, I'm talking about bona fide tenants, because there were tenants who then said, we were told we're going to rent to buy, and that was never the case. So you also had I think the component of tenants who either lied or were dishonest and contributed to the social housing institutions failing. So, but apart from that, I think that in itself is not the solution to providing affordable rental. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of provincially and also nationally, where the government really needs to address the rental issue.
Exactly. I think you've reached a very important part of our discussion, and that's my game back in the years. I hope I didn't forget it, but inshallah we'll pick up that a little bit later after the news break. We also have other important issues to discuss, but I think you've reached a very important point in the discussion. 2 aspects. One is the current state of our tenants who are facing hardship living in these flats that are conveniently located, and many of them are pensioners and grantees, old age that cannot find any employment, plus they have to pay utilities. And on the other hand, government's lack of provision of subsidies for rental housing. Inshallah, we'll take a break for news, and inshallah, we'll continue after the news break.
Amen.
An informative Islamic global perspective. This is Al Ansar News.
Making news this hour, the 24th of July, the news from Durban 90.4 FM, Peter Maritzburg 105.6 FM. KwaZulu-Natal Premier delivers Lekotla today. Good evening. American Monina, the KwaZulu-Natal Cabinet Lekotla delivers his Lekotla in Durban today. The Premier Tamintuli says there are plans in place to deal with issues arising in the province. He has this to say.
Construction and infrastructure development at the center of our new economic growth strategy of the province. No one can argue with the fact that KwaZulu-Natal is a construction site, as it is visible on the national and provincial road network, as well as a human settlement. We are noting with concern the disturbances of projects in the construction industry in the province. As part of ongoing and inclusive engagement, and in a bid to find solutions in the construction industry, I've directed that the responsible MECs must urgently organize an engagement with the construction industry within the next few days. In fact, I will be meeting those who are in the construction industry.
Still with the Premier, he also weighed in on the issue of the extended public program workers' strike, which is currently going on.
On the issue of the EPWP strike, we are attending to that. We have received the memorandum. We have agreed that I will be meeting His Worship the Mayor of eThekwini about this one. And I think we'll be making considerations of not only the one that is happening here in eThekwini. I think the concern is all over when it comes to EPWPs, because when I read the memorandum that they sent to my office, they were saying they have been employed there as EPWPs for 10 years and they are about to retire, and then they were given a letter to go home now before retirement. So we'll be getting closer on that matter and we'll be able to appraise the public on the way forward.
Still with KwaZulu-Natal, KwaZulu-Natal Police says the police does not shoot first and inquire later. This follows an incident in Inanda where suspect exchanged gunfire with the police. KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner Hlanhla Mkhwanazi has this to say.
In the South African Police Service, we have rules, and one of the rules is that we have to bring the suspects into court. So our effort is to try and secure those that have been accused of a criminal act. We have to take them to court. So for us in the process, there will be resistance, and if resistance is so heavy that it leads into a gunfight, and members are involved in a gunfight, the procedure is that those members have to be withdrawn from the operations, and we have to send them for counseling. So there's a whole psychological process that you have to embark upon in order to make sure that the members don't make it a habit and they cancel themselves, so that it does not traumatize them in the future, the incident that will have happened. So we try and mitigate it in that instance. But it's some activities that we cannot avoid, they do happen. We can only win the battle if every police officer on the ground goes their weight. And for us, we employ the man marking strategy that we employed as a province.
The Thabo Bester matter has been postponed to the 31st of July for yet another attempt at a pre-trial conference. They face an array of charges relating to Bester's dramatic escape from custody. A lawyer representing two of the accused has withdrawn from the case. And finally, international story, pro-Palestine protesters have obstructed the entrances to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office headquarters in London, expressing their dissatisfaction with the lack of action on the part of the new Labour government in altering UK policy regarding Israel's genocide in Gaza. Some 300 demonstrators outside the government office today waved the Palestinian flag while holding placards and banners that read "Genocide Made in Britain" and calling on the British government to ban arms exports to Tel Aviv. At least 9 activists were arrested for clashes erupted between law enforcement and the protesters. The Workers for a Free Palestine, which coordinated the demonstration, stated their objective is to hold the Foreign Secretary David Lammy accountable for his previous statement and ensure that he follows through on his own calls for transparency by releasing legal guidance on UK arms sales to Israel. A protester from the organization says that if the advice confirms Israel has breached international law, as the shadow foreign minister says it does, the government should immediately halt arms exports to Israel. Your weather, 21 degrees. A quick reminder of our top story. The KwaZulu-Natal Cabinet Lekotla is delivered today in Durban by the Premier. That's the news.
You've asked, and we've listened. The Sultan Bahu Family Fete is here again. Help us heal hearts by joining us at the Old Durban Drive-In from the 8th to the 11th of August, 10 a.m. to midnight for loads of fun, food, shopping, a grand fun fair, comedy, kavali, and giveaways. For stall inquiries, call Tasneem on 081-836-2888. That's 081-836-2888. The Sultan Bahu Family Fete. A fate with a purpose. Sultan Bahu is a registered NPO and PBO.
Assalamu alaikum. Join Raouf for our annual fundraising dinner on Saturday, 27 July, 6 p.m. at 233 Spencer Road. Tickets are sold at 250 Rand per person. Call or WhatsApp Nafisa on 082 688 1631. Raouf, a beacon of hope for families struggling with drug addiction. Together we can make a difference.
This segment is brought to you by Kenfield Auto, your RMI approved service and repair specialist. 236 Brickfield Road, Overport.
Kenfield Auto. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد.
Car won't start?
Kenfield Auto.
Noisy brakes?
Kenfield Auto.
Due for a service?
Kenfield Auto.
Kenfield Auto, the answer to all your car problems. Your service and repair specialist for your VW, Audi, Suzuki, Toyota, or just about any vehicle. Kenfield Auto, your RMI and insurance approved workshop to handle them all. 236 Brickfield Road, Overport. Call us on 031 207 2399. Kenfield Auto.
Help African Muslims Agency to bring warmth to the people of Gaza, Afghanistan, and Lebanon. As snow falls in these regions, thousands of families in Gaza will be left out in the cold, while Palestinian and to survive with inadequate shelter. With your assistance, AMA can provide these families with heaters, stoves, fuel, blankets, and warm clothing for 4,000 Rand per rescue kit. Visit africamuslimsagency.co.za and donate now.
Radio Al Ansar, 24/7, 365.
Of using Focus Live on Radio Al Ansar International, broadcasting on frequency Durban 90.4 FM, Kilimanjaro 105.6 FM, and audio streaming on www.alansar.org.za. For the news break, we were chatting briefly with Muhammad, a member of the KwaZulu Rural Housing Tribunal for 9 years, last 3 years as its deputy chairperson currently of the Organization of Civic Rights, and we were chatting about the challenges and difficulties that tenants are having living in flatted units. How do we deal with these challenges? Inshallah, we'll continue with the discussion a little bit later, but I want to bring back Dr. Faisal Suleiman into the discussion. Before we chatted with Andre and Dr. Said Muhammad, Faisal was talking about the IMA convention that's going to take place on the 10th of 11th, which I'll give him a few minutes to chat about. But what I wanted to check as a result of the humanitarian aid that the IMA is providing to the communities, including some efforts on Gaza, etc. And the vision is to assist doctors who've been affected in Gaza, and what is the overall sort of intention to improve the lives of people in Gaza. These initiatives come at a cost. So Faisal, can you briefly explain to us, how do you finance all these projects? Because obviously I know doctors do pay subscriptions, but a lot of funding is required for this humanitarian initiatives that you are taking place.
Yes, thank you, Yunus. So a lot of it, or most of it, also comes from donors, public corporates who donate to the IMA. And then the conventions, so maybe I just checked a little bit about, so the profits from the convention as well go towards this. So IMA holds a family convention every year this is our 42nd. It rotates between Johannesburg, Cape Town and Durban. This year it's in Cape Town. This year, uniquely, we're also hosting, so IMA is part of FEMA. FEMA is the Federation of International Medical Aid, 42 member countries from all over the world.
These are mostly Muslim affiliates.
Look, by nature, the Islamic Medical Association, all of but of course, a lot of them are from the Middle Eastern and Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. But of course, many from secular European countries like, we would say the United States, Canada, Australia, the UK, and then of course, many of the African countries, Uganda, Kenya, Somaliland, etc. These are all members. And so this year we first host the convention, the council meeting for FEMA, the annual council meeting. So we host that on the 8th and 9th of August at the Lord Charles in Somerset in Cape Town. That brings all of these people from all over the world to Cape Town, and inshallah, and many of them are leading experts in their fields. Professors of neurology, of plastic surgeons, cardiothoracics, etc., etc. So many of them stay on for the annual IMA convention, which then follows on the 10th and 11th. And that convention is unique in a sense that it's a family convention. So we have sessions for doctors or mixed sessions that involve fiqh, medical ethics, Islamic ethics, all of this. So these are sessions for everybody. Then you have breakaway sessions. So part of the convention, some you'll have specifically medical, dental, optometry, some of the allied health. We have a huge a very decent student program. We subsidize students to go there from across the country. That's how we mentor, network, and the students, get
These
to
are medical students mostly.
All health sciences, yeah.
Okay.
All right. And of course, there's a spousal program. Many of the delegates come with their spouses. So there's a program for the spouses, also a mixture of fun, medical education, exercise program, healthcare, all of that, yes. Wellness, etc. And we have, they have programs then for the teens and the kids as well to keep them occupied as well. So that's why it's a family convention. It's a good place to network. And then, of course, part of the convention is also the exhibitions by the various drug companies, Sharia compliant, Sharia bankers. So you ask the question. So they all, of course, pay exhibition fees. It's still a huge cost to run this convention. Obviously, all of the people who register pay for registration and the hotel fees and everything else. But any profit that arises from these conventions is also then used to subsidize the running of the IMA or the projects. So, we fund various projects all over the country. Sometimes there are profits from some of the projects, sometimes renal dialysis, because some of the patients who have medical aid, for example, if there's a profit, that then goes to subsidize patients who don't have, or either coming on zakat or lila, or there's no funds, that goes to, so there's a bit of cross subsidization of that. But you're right, it's a massive undertaking. I was mentioning before we broke our bursary scheme. We spent about R1 million this year, funding about 13 health sciences units across the country. So those, of course, are, and of course, we're very grateful for the generosity of our community, the corporates who support us, the exhibitors, and alhamdulillah, it's always a challenge to raise money. It's a constant battle, and that's why I mentioned the fact that we need to develop a legacy waqf, so that we eventually, don't have to only rely on donations, and we can be not completely self-sufficient, because the need for zakah and renal dialysis is so huge that we know what's going on in the state, and therefore the demand on IMA is quite high all the time.
Listen, just to pick up on what Iqbal was saying, a lot of pensioners, grantees, they're suffering with various medical conditions, and for them to, go to government hospitals, they're going to wait, and some of them have these emergency issues, so they're going to come to the IMA facilities for dialysis, etc. And it's important that that facility is open for such people if they cannot get access to government. Two important questions on the conference before we close the discussion is, I know you mentioned medical personnel and healthcare workers, etc., are encouraged to attend, but ordinary people like Iqbal and myself that have got an interest, not necessarily, the detailed medical profession, but on wellness programs, etc.
Yes.
Is it open to everyone?
Yes, you'd pay a registration fee as a day delegate if you didn't want to stay there for the whole 2 days, so you can come in as a day delegate. And yes, you'd be welcome to sit in any of the sessions as a day delegate. Some of it may be not relevant to you. I mean, the latest treatment on AIDS, for example, or the latest technology in endoscopic prostatectomies. Now there are talks being.
Those are quite technical,
right? Those are specifically, yes, those are quite technical. A layperson probably will be lost there.
Confused, yeah.
But a lot of the talks are general on ethics. There's a lot of fiqh. There's a lot of
how to handle things like diabetes,
Sharia, etc.
hypertension, and those stuff.
So yes. To answer your question, it's open. You pay the registration fee. You can attend.
So not only restricted to health professionals or health.
No, yeah. Part of it would be a bit of a waste if you're paying so much that you find. But if you want to come in, yes, absolutely.
Now tell me, if the people want to register, your the site in which they can get in.
Yes, so it's the imasa.org.za, imasa.org.za. And we really would encourage, I really would like to appeal to, it's not too late. We still have rooms in the hotel. There's flights available to Cape Town. It's a wonderful setting at Lord Charles in Somerset.
So it's a nice break.
It's a long weekend. The 9th is a public holiday. So we're hoping medical personnel who are listening, inshallah, and as I said, we've expanded. Allied health is taking its rightful place. More and more talks by allied health professionals. It's not a doctor-dominated convention. Probably used to be, but that is also changing as well.
Faisal, I know your supper is getting cold, and
no,
you came straight. We have to release you now, but I won't leave you until I hear you're being a civic activist and a political activist, and I know you have a lot of interviews and you've got your own issues regarding the DA's participation in GNU and the Palestine sentiments. You heard Prof. Andre chatting that, listen, the GNU is the best of the worst solutions, or whatever you call it. There was no other alternative, and if there were the other opposition parties involved, then we would have had the decline. So your final comments on the GNU: will it work, or is it still dicey, or we're not sure, or it may turn out to be a big problem?
All right. So now I'll take the IMA hat cap off and I'll
put your political cap on for 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
Samnet, yes. So I think the tests are still to come. And a most practical example is foreign policy. The ANC and the DA are diametrically opposed.
Correct.
On foreign policy issues. Neoliberals, capital, whatever, Israel, United States, the G7 says is correct. And Prof is, he mentioned, and I don't think we must underestimate, in many ways, there is a third world war is on. It's on economically. The Belt and Road Initiative of China is seen as a direct threat to U.S. hegemony. Make no mistake.
Correct.
For them, that is economic warfare.
Right.
Taiwan is sitting there waiting. I mean, the U.S. is now pumping more air bases and naval bases surrounding in the Taiwan in the strait there, right? And increasing number of military bases in the Middle East. So there is a war going on. It's just not open. The Ukraine is a proxy war between the West and
Russia.
and Russia.
Yes.
So that is going on, and it's not
Well,
going
Palestine is another proxy war between the West and Palestine.
Well, Palestine, the people in Gaza are taking on the world.
Yes.
We know there's British, American, obviously Israeli special forces that are in operation.
Even the
right?
Arab countries, UAE and others.
Right. That is on the soldiers on the ground. As for intelligence in the air, drones, satellite, all of that, they've got carte blanche from, they've got all of these satellites pointing and telling them where to bomb, what to bomb, etc., etc. So literally, people in Gaza have taken on the world, not just Israel. And Allah, of course, help them. So you asked about the GNU. There is one that one is a huge example of where when they really get stuck into it, what's going to happen. Economically, whether it used to be RDP, then GEAR, right, and now it's the ANC has been neoliberalist capital. It moved away from socialism due to incompetence, mismanagement, and pure graft. And the DA, of course, is exactly the opposite. So the interesting part is going to be the role of the tripartite alliance. What is going to happen to the left? Are they going to go and find EFF and MK and align themselves because they now have a common? They're coalescing on some parts, right? Problem is with EFF, you don't know what you get. What you get on a Monday is not what you're getting on a Wednesday and what you're getting on a Saturday. With MK, it's a bit of an unknown entity.
They're unusually quiet.
Right, they're quiet. There's no clear spelling out of policy. We'll wait,
Maybe the members haven't got a clue about what's happening.
No, I don't. I think it's more than maybe. I think promises were made that we will be part of the GNU or the provincial, especially this province. And
they missed the trick there.
You see, a lot of this was on patronage. Whatever one may say about the ANC, the MK was built on potential, the same patronage that the gravy train, if you want to put it simply.
The ANC wanted
now
another...
this gravy train is not materializing for the MK.
Definitely.
It hasn't materialized.
The ANC wanted another party and they thought MK would get the balance of the votes and join in, but Zuma came in between and said, hey, sort my issues out before I join.
You will remember, Yunus, right at the outset, I said President Zuma's interest in this is only one way,
Correct.
to find a political solution to his legal problems. I've been talking about that since the MK announced, the day he announced it.
And he's waiting for that to happen.
Right? When you sort out mine's and my children's political, criminal and all of those issues, then, will we see.
Business as usual, yes.
Yeah, so really, yes, I'm not enamored in any way by the fact that the DA and that alliance, that this Zionist alliance, IFP is DA and Gayton McKenzie's Patriot College alliance, have now their grips in in power, and I see that growing. I see further, the ANC's, the central probably eventually getting bought out. It's the left that I think this is what the conundrum is going to be for the ANC. I think Duvenava is right, the prof, in terms of President Ramaphosa's leadership. He's treading water on the surface.
Correct.
And to answer your question, who knows?
Time will tell.
What I think will keep it together is self-interest for all of those parties. The ANC's and DA's self-interest is going to take precedence here, especially ANC's self-interest. They will, like the proverbial frog boiling in water, they're just going to a little bit get warmer and warmer and warmer, but they're not going to jump because they need to preserve, or else the ANC is done. Look, we don't know about the MK. It's highly personality-driven. Should something happen to President Ramaphosa, and Zuma, I sound like Biden now, to President Zuma, and he's obviously coming on in age. One doesn't know how personality-driven this has been. What is very smart and may undermine MK is the fact that the Zulu nationalist label, to some extent, has been taken away by the IFP. Very smart move, make the premier of KZ and IFP go win over the king. You see now, the province and national fund the king. That 50 million per annum for all of those cars and houses and wives and all that come at the behest of who controls the purses. By the IFP controlling the purses, right, they have a strong influence on which way the king sways, right? And that is going to undermine or negate to some extent the influence of MK. And I think that in this province, whether it's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know. But certainly once Zuma goes and there's no patronage, and what the gravy train seats aren't there anymore.
Support of
Yes,
MK may decline.
I think you may see.
And EFF is also on the decline.
Yes, we have seen with EFF. In the last two elections, those who, especially the young students who were taken in by the rhetoric and the populist nonsense, have it's been stagnant.
Thanks, Dr. Faisal Sulaiman. Very interesting comments, very interesting observations. I told you that he puts his political cap on. We can talk all night. Go and enjoy your supper. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll have you in not too a distant future back here to discuss the PNU, Provincial National Unity, KZN, and other implications, including IMA. Thanks very much, Faisal, for joining us.
And thanks to Iqbal and for sitting patiently while I
it was a pleasure having you. They enjoyed it and we all enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Faisal Sulaiman, President of IMA and also Chairman of SAMNet. Some interesting observations. I want to bring in, our economist, Hassan Mutala, Chartered Accountant, Asset Manager. Hassan, I see the markets are pretty stable. RAN is on or around 1795 to 1820. JSE All Share Index is between 79 and 82 for the last couple of weeks. So GNU is having an impact and they're playing their cards well.
Sure. I think a couple of key things. Firstly, if you look at some of the important appointments you've had within the ministers. Firstly, the fact that the finance minister has remained the same. Enoch Godwana is well respected. He's trusted by both local and foreign investors, and he's saying the right things. If you look at whatever he's spoken since the new GNU has been appointed, he's focusing on a couple of key things. Firstly, stabilizing the fiscal situation, which is the debt. The debt remains the biggest risk to the South African government's balance sheet is debt. With 20% of our budget going towards the interest costs or financing costs, it's an important area that he needs to focus on over the next few years. And that remains his core issue if you look at what he's spoken about. The second thing they're trying to address is trying to improve economic growth. Now, it's not only him that's speaking about it. If you look at a couple of the key, Park Stow, new Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. If you look at some of the other ministers, whether it's Baba Krisi on the transport side and the like, the key focus amongst many of these ministers, in fact, the other one we were talking about earlier about Home Affairs and the like within ourselves, we're talking about, that's the new minister from the Democratic Alliance as well. He's talked about that where there was a backlog of over 300,000 visa applications. It's now gone to 200,000.
So he's moving
on
that. So
they're moving on it. They want to move on it pretty quickly over the next few months.
They want to improve service delivery in these areas.
Delivery in these areas. And very importantly, getting in the right skills. We were talking earlier with Dr. Faisal about, some of the doctors that want to come in from African countries and like. These are doctors and experts and people that have phenomenal skills that can impart knowledge and impart the skills into this country, not necessarily just for conferences, but, coming in and working in various parts of our economy. We need some of the skills. We may be lacking in many areas. And unfortunately, Department of Home Affairs in many instances has been a stumbling block and a roadblock for allowing these individuals and highly skilled individuals to come into our country. If they come in, they impart their knowledge and they work, and it unlocks again economic growth in many areas of our, and they're focusing on that. So that's the second area. The third area, I think, which the markets are handling, is that our trade and our exports and our imports has had a fairly decent run year to date. So if I look at January through to May, we're sitting on a trade surplus of 45 billion rands. Fantastic. What that means. So for everybody out there, it means looking at our exports versus our imports. Our exports is what we're exporting. Our big exports, if you look at it, our mining sector. Our mining sector is one of the biggest. Gold, platinum, and diamonds year to date, about 145 billion rands. It generated in revenues. The other big export is iron ore or ores. Manganese,
I want
iron
to
ore.
stop
and the
you there. And I know when I had a politician in the studio a couple of years ago, and he mentioned that these mines are in the control of these capitalists, the Oppenheimers and various other people. Historically, they bought the mines off, but at reduced rates, and they're still controlling all the mines. And there were talks about a lot of coal was being exported, and yet we were needing the coal here. Now, are those guys still in control, those capitalists of the mines? Because an important part you mentioned is that there's a trade surplus, but is it in the hands of the capitalists? In which way is government benefiting? Our listeners maybe just want
100%.
some kind of a feedback.
So if you look at from the trade surplus, if you look at majority of the top 40 companies in the JSE are still controlled by your advantaged and capitalists.
White capitalists,
That's a fact.
yes.
The white capitalists, that remains that. Although you've had, for example, the PIC, which is the Public Investment Commissioner and is responsible for managing the largest pension fund in the country, which is the Government Employees Pension Fund. So everybody that works within the public sector in South Africa belongs to the Government Employees Pension Fund. That pension fund is one of the big shareholders in majority of the companies on the JSE. So that
Including the mining companies. Now, what percentage of shareholding?
It varies quite significantly between different companies. But I give you an example.
Those pension funds are benefiting.
100%.
But how does the citizens benefit the government?
Citizens benefit through taxes. There's two ways. So
taxes to those companies.
To this company. So those companies are going to be paying taxes on average, say 28%. They're paying tax on the profits they generate. So they're paying on that day. Then there's also other royalties, for example, on gold and there's sometimes certain royalties they'll pay. Again, there'll be some form of tax.
So there is revenue to the state coming through.
100% there's revenues that is coming to the state. Very importantly, it is a big generator for revenues to the state. And when the mining sector is doing well, and it means that our revenue generation for SARS is on the up. It benefits substantially.
Now, when Malema and co were talking about expropriation of land without compensation, etc., and then some guys were looking at these BEE contracts, and I know a lot of these companies brought in black directors, these mining companies, in a way to spread the wealth. In which way has that impacted in economic empowerment to the disadvantaged communities?
Sure.
Because what we now letting our listeners hear is the fact that there's been a surplus, it's been a boom, it's been helping, we're getting our tax returns from there, it's benefiting the taxpayer. But the questions that some of the politicians are raising, especially from the opposition parties, is that these guys were privileged, legislation is not there to take it away from them. Can they be privileged lifelong, or is there a way of spreading or spreading part of the wealth to other people?
Sure. So we had BE that was implemented many years back. Since from post 1994, BE was implemented. Similarly, there were many BE deals that were done. There were pros and there were cons. The cons was early on in the days, especially in the late 90s.
I know ISCO opened up its shares to all the people to buy at a reduced rate. Well, you may have bought that time and benefited, and you didn't.
Correct.
So, but not all the companies. I know Sasol opened up and few others.
So there was two ways. The one was through public participation, but what is the key driver in terms of BE was to try and encourage or drove deals being done would unfortunately connected people in many cases, and it was a privileged few. So it was not a broad spectrum.
But
that's what happened in the early days.
I want to mention investors lost off when COVID provided the opportunity, when the shares were reduced drastically.
Yeah.
They crashed. You take Sasol, you couldn't buy Sasol under 350 Rand a share, and it crashed to 20 Rand a share in the space of 2 months in COVID. Which means a person like yourself could have bought 1,000 Sasol, even though you may have had 20,000 Rand, Iqbal. In the past, you needed 200,000. Now, our guys didn't take advantage. And those that took advantage, they basically seen a small profit and they sold. Now, there was another story about COVID and why that happened. And the main investors were the guys that cashed in. But having said that, there's obviously concern that these big mining houses are still in the hands of these capitalists.
Yes.
And they're using it as a profit sharing type thing for themselves. So you continue, because what we're trying to work out is, he's talking about people who receive a very minimal pension. And unlike UK, where if you talk about the dole, it's probably 25, 30K a month. If you talk about £2,000, so they able to survive. But our guys with the pension of whatever they're getting, 2,000 or 2,500, doesn't take them very far. So continue.
So I want to highlight actually, so whether it's pensioners, investors, and the like. So you're right. We talked about earlier that majority of the mining companies and majority of the top 40 are still controlled by your mining monopoly. But they controlled as in the executive management and that. But more and more and increasingly through the pension funds like the PIC and the like, shareholding is slowly increasing in terms of the majority of the people of the. But it's still some time to go and some way to go in terms of that. But executive management is still taking a lot longer. We have had change. If you look at 30 years back, the number of non-white representatives in terms of board of directors and executive management was less than 10%, not even less than 5%. If you look at 1994, today it's still less than 50%, but it's a lot higher than what we were 30 years ago.
Correct.
So I think we've made some, but it's still in the hands of the white.
Not long ago, I interviewed the chairman of Goldfields and Liberty, Mr. Yunus Suleiman Chanajin. Yes. So obviously, our guys are getting into these companies, but to get onto the other side of the shareholding is a challenge.
One thing I want to highlight exactly what Iqbal spoke about, early on as well. And so investors have various options in terms of whether you're a pensioner, whether you're saving, you're starting off and you're saving, or whether you are, you've accumulated wealth. You can use property. You can use the stock market, and stock market not necessarily directly because you may not have the expertise. You go via your unit trust, so you can buy shares directly as well if you have some expertise, but either the unit trust or your tax-free investments. And then there's other alternative investments, be it, you have sort of what you call your pension funds or retirement funds. That's, for example, RAs, for example, to tax efficient. And then alternatives being your agricultural funds and the like. But the two, if you look at, your income funds, which is where the safe and but coming back to property versus, for example, your stock markets and the like. Property historically, if you look at over the last 100 years, property has been a phenomenal investment, not only in South Africa, but globally. It's been a fantastic investment over the last 100 years. However, times also do change in terms of what impacts property investors over a period of time. Iqbal spoke about earlier, in terms of there's cost that you need to understand when you're looking at a return. I'll give you a good example. If you're buying a residential flat, whether it's in, say, for example, Overport, we're on the corner here from Overport, you're buying a residential flat for R1 million. You're renting it out for 8,000 Rand per month. Your levies and your rates and taxes on that around 2,000 Rand a month. So you're getting net 6,000 Rand a month. 6,000 times 12, 72,000. The return on that is about 7.2%. 7.2% if it's straight directly from your money and you're not funding it, because many people take out a bond and they fund many of their property investment. Assuming you're funding it from your cash, you got R1 million, you bought it, you're getting a 7.2% return, which is okay. You're relying on capital appreciation that takes place over time. Secondly, this is excluding your maintenance issues. So levy also takes into account the building itself, but within your apartment itself, you normally spend for the uptake of that. So there's a lot of other hidden costs that you need to understand when you're going into property. And one of the big issues South African property investors have had over the last 10 years has this issue been around non-payment of rentals and, illegal occupation after, especially COVID. You saw many of it started a lot during that, not started, but it proliferated, I think, during COVID, and it's continued. And it's going to, I know many clients that have had apartments that they hold 6 to 12 months, a guy or a family is staying in there, not paying no rental, and they're having to go through the legal process to try and get the person out. So it's a difficult process. So property remains a fantastic source of investment longer term, but be aware of the risks and the challenges there. The other opportunities, they are there. Whether it's putting money in the bank, the Sharia compliant banks are still giving you, say, 7 to 8% at relatively low risk. But the stock market long term still creates opportunities. And Yunus, those things happen. We talked about how COVID, there was phenomenal buying opportunities. Yes, the market has had a good run over the last few years and it's moved up again. But the opportunities do arise. And with this new government and the focus on driving growth, they just need to sort out a few wins. A few wins like no load shedding, a few wins like getting the improvement in terms of the rail network and the like to improve exports and the like. And you'll just see the repercussions of that coming through, not only on growth, but also on stock market performance and the currency performance as well.
Quite optimistic remarks. I didn't sort of chat much about Dr. Iqbal Muhammad. I mentioned he's basically chairperson of Organization of Civic Rights. He's also a human rights activist engaged in grassroots issues over the past 40 years, championing the rights of tenants. A humanist whose positive energy and passion for the rights of people transcends ethnicity and nationalism. He was part of MDM and in post-apartheid served as an advisor to the National Ministry of Housing and overhauling tenancy law proposals, blueprint help shape new law, etc. Served as a metropolitan councillor. I remember I was there when you were a councillor, Iqbal, and you took us on the rural rental issues, 1998 to 2000. Yeah. As a mediator and commissioner of KZN Rental Housing Tribunal, we did get hauled in there from time to time, and you took us to task. Iqbal is quite highly qualified, and we call him Dr. Iqbal Muhammad because he's got a doctorate in philosophy and various other qualifications. Iqbal, we don't want to talk about the PI Act because I remember that was the way in which tenants were protected against, evictions, and they obviously, you threw it to the council, you threw it to us in Chatsworth that, listen, provide them alternative accommodation. And I remember the late Imba Naidu, who was part of the civic organizations in Chatsworth that time and in Newlands, etc. He stood strongly against evictions of tenants if they couldn't afford it. Now, I mentioned there's over 33% unemployment in South Africa, of which a large percentage is in KZN. You mentioned that those tenants, forget about other areas, even the areas close to you in central Durban and in and around Overport and Clear Estate and other places where there's blocks of flats. I mentioned Al Ansar is trying to help these people to pay utilities, but they don't earn any income. How do the landlords manage these tenants, Iqbal? Because obviously they're going into areas with rentals, but some of our sort of Muslim stroke Indian tenants are very vigilant, and somehow or the other they'll work part-time, they'll do a bit of hawking, they'll do a bit of flea market, earn some money and pay their rentals to make sure they're in those flatted units. But a fair percentage of them simply cannot afford it. They require assistance. How do you handle those tenants with the landlords? Because what Hassan is now saying, those landlords got overheads to maintain those flats. So how do you handle it as OCR?
Yeah, usually, we'll have those kind of cases where the tenants would be facing eviction. In some instances, drastic action, like this morning, we had tenants from 2 buildings where they were locked out, services were disconnected. For now, we have their side of the story. Of course, the action in itself is illegal. Locking the tenant out because
how did they lock the tenant out? Did they force him out of the house?
No. They brought in guys, armed heavyweights. Right? So those are serious issues. Okay. On the face of it, tenants will say, look, they've had problems, maintenance and so on. They're up to date with their rental. When you start probing and then you speak to the other side, to the landlady, you have a different story. So you have a holistic picture where, in fact, the tenant hasn't paid for the past 10 months or whatever the case is. So we will negotiate. One is that tenant has to be restored possession immediately, because you can't expect the tenant to live out in the street.
So the PI Act prohibits eviction.
Not necessarily the PI Act, the Rental Housing Act, the common law.
Yes.
And it's actually universal. Any country where you look at, no one is allowed to be illegally dispossessed.
You've got to go through the legal process.
Yeah, that's another story, because it's lengthy, it's costly. So we would mediate as far as we can, or we would refer them to the tribunal, which is the proper forum for them to resolve their conflict. So while we represent tenants, and it's been a tenants organization for 40 years, we always remind tenants, and part of the work we do is empower tenants in terms of what their rights are, but also what their duties and obligations are.
Correct.
So we're not there, to disregard the
Landlord's
rights, the landlord's rights, and also educate landlords on their obligations. So it's a very difficult situation where you have a non-paying tenant, where the landlord or landlady has been, very kind, accommodating, to the point where the rental has accumulated. And there are instances where, obviously the tenant can't afford to pay the service charges, so the municipality has disconnected the electricity and perhaps even the water supply, and then there's illegal connection. So that has a serious implication, negative impact on the property owner, because ultimately, in terms of, legislation, it's not the tenant, but the owner who will be held responsible for any illegal.
And that is an area of concern also.
So there are lots of issues, but overall, there have been instances where landlords have been very accommodating and would reach a compromise to say, I'm willing to write off the 10 months or 6 months or even, substantial arrears, provided you move out within, say, the next few weeks or whatever.
Move out to where?
That is the difficulty, right? But there are cases where tenants have found ways to, either to live with friends or family. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for people to find
alternative accommodation,
affordable alternate accommodation.
Correct.
And to find that almost instantly or immediately, because the landlord now needs the property. And then, the tenant can't really find rental accommodation because upfront security deposit is required, perhaps even an advance rental for a month's advance rental. So,
and then the new landlord may look at this individual's track record and say, I don't want to inherit a problem here.
Exactly. So there are lots of difficulties. And so there are instances where people have actually been rendered homeless because there is no other alternative. They cannot afford rental, cannot pay the arrear rental, and so they become homeless.
Now, I recall, and I'm not sure, I thought your organization was involved with this Howell Road social housing project where, sometimes with the non-African families, they're not as militant as the African families. And I recall in the Howell Road social housing project, a lot of the mafias that came in and they threatened, the housing association that we're going to deal with y'all if y'all just render these guys. And these guys had a court order to evict the non-paying tenants. I'm not sure whether you have situations like that and how do y'all handle it?
In fact, I think those tenants did approach us in the past and we've referred them to the tribunal, but also reminded them that once there's a court order, the Rental Housing Tribunal has no jurisdiction because the court has already decided.
They've considered all the factors.
In any case, the Rental Housing Tribunal has all the powers save for granting an eviction order, and that's because in terms of our constitution of the country, the tribunal, in terms of its definition of what constitutes a court, the tribunal is excluded from that definition. So hence the tribunal doesn't have the power to grant eviction. But everything else, the Rental Housing Tribunal is the forum to approach for landlords and tenants. So these tenants had approached the tribunal. I'm not sure what had happened, with that. I am aware of issues, and I also know that that particular social housing institute shared, office space in the same building that I'm in, and they moved out. And
because
I
they
know
were threatened.
And yes, they
moved to Durban North,
yes.
I remember.
Yes, they were
because they were
serious
part of the
issues.
municipality in the past, and then they became a Section 21 company.
Yeah.
And I recall that they bought some flats in the city area, and then they're facing difficulties. So, long and short, Iqbal, is what you're articulating is that there's extreme hardship, there's extreme poverty. These people that are encountering difficulties, it's no choice of them to be in that situation because some of them can't get employed.
What is happening is that the landlords, landladies, the property owners are now subsidizing and assisting. I'm talking about instances where they have, or even if they're not doing it voluntarily, at the end of the day, with the legal cost and so on that's involved, they end up subsidizing those tenants who are facing difficulties, right? And this is where the government has failed to date to intervene. This is the government's responsibility.
The government has just turned a blind eye.
And I am not sure, and I don't have much confidence that the government of national unity will actually focus on.
They got other huge challenges.
But you have almost a quarter of the country's population who live in rented accommodation. So it's it doesn't have to be a substantial number of people, but the fact that people are facing hardships, and it's the government's responsibility to intervene in one way or the other.
President, in his opening speech, when he was talking about the different portfolios, and he referred to human settlements, and he referred to eThekwini and the problems here, and the maladministration, and having a commission to oversee, and he brought in Section 154, where he brought in some interventions. He mentioned that human settlements is a huge problem here in KZN, and I know that he tasked those involved to start looking at improving service delivery. And you're quite right. The sort of involvement of government and the municipalities in human settlements has been limited, and a lot of funds are going towards areas where they're not recovering, like I mentioned, hostels, in KZN, and the informal settlements, which means that they're not going to deal with the crises we have here of, rented accommodation for people, because social housing was intended to provide at least about 10,000 units per annum, and they're not even providing 1,000. And that too, if you're lucky. So which means that either money is being squandered into maladministration or being wasted in hostel accommodation to appease those.
But I think it's beyond eThekwini. It's national.
Yes.
And remember, I mean, you have tenants struggling around the country, and perhaps even worse in other provinces. So nationally, the government
it's
has
a crisis.
And something has to be done.
They need to plow more money into human settlements, and they need to have more effective practitioners administering these various portfolios. So obviously, and they need performance management, because if the target nationally is, as I know previously, 1 million housing units per annum they were talking about to deal with the crisis, and they're not even 100,000. Let alone rental accommodation.
Remember, we're talking about struggling tenants. We're not even looking at people who are living in...
the middle income people that need this.
And also people living in informal settlements who are waiting to be accommodated. So we will have a huge housing crisis.
In eThekwini alone is more than 200,000 families. And those guys just got basic services like electricity and water, but that too on a prepaid metering or maybe in whatever form. But what about the backyard dwellers? And we picked up a large number, are there as well.
Yep.
Luckily that some of the non-African families are vigilant, and they were able to put up outhouses for their extended families, etc., and take care. But a large number of them are tenants living in these. So where to from here, Iqbal, your concluding remarks? You've got a challenge and you believe it's too big a challenge to really handle, or you're just doing as much as you can as OCR, trying to help tenants and landlords and manage, but you got limited funding also, and there's so much you can do.
Absolutely. So on the one hand, we continue to provide the services we can, and we render free service to tenants, and done so for many decades. But the other is perhaps to and we do network with other organizations around the country, Western Cape, Gauteng, and so on. And maybe to really, and now that you're asking, is to network and to workshop a way forward. Of course, you're going to present all these ideas and motivation to government. The government has to have the will to want to do that, have to recognize the needs of the poor. So let's hope, inshallah, we can find a way.
What you're also trying to impart is that we must have active civic organizations and ratepayer association that don't only look at rates issues, but look at housing for the people that need housing.
Yeah.
So there must be stronger civic organizations, ratepayer associations to take government on and municipalities on the adequate provision of housing, because without that provision of subsidized housing, landlords, really cannot afford to subsidize anymore.
Yep. I totally agree.
Iqbal, this is quite a lengthy subject, I know, having been involved for many, many, many years. And we tried to tackle it, but unfortunately the population is growing much higher than what the government can afford. And many critics are saying that if they could take care of all the funds that were used for maladministration and corruption and bribery, they could have attempted to sort out the housing or part of the housing crisis. But Iqbal, thanks for joining us, and you shared some very important information. From a perspective of NGOs, I think it's important NGOs keep this in mind, the support to tenants who are battling in the various rental units, like what Al Ansar is doing. But we can afford to subsidize or provide support to X number, but the numbers are too large. So we need all our NGOs to really focus and try to assist these people, investigate through your offices who's facing hardship. And as you said, it's a combined effort of our NGOs and funds like Zakat Lillah, etc., can be used to assist people overcome this hardship until they're in a position to acquire employment and earn a kind of living to pay for their rentals.
In any case, Jazakallah for having me on the show. And make dua, inshallah, that we find solutions.
And Iqbal, I'd like to compliment you on the sort of urgency of you handling this matter and the consistency of you being involved. I know it's not a paying job, and you're relying on some kind of funding from abroad and other places, which is also limited. But in whichever way the NGOs who are listening can assist and work with OCR and others in assisting our tenants, it's all part of Deen. It's a humanitarian effort, and we can assist. Shukran for joining us, Iqbal. Hassan, your concluding comments. We're almost there.
Sure.
And I know this is a financial issue, and you mentioned that apartments and whatever you and middle income people, but here we've got millions of people who are tenants that are facing hardship, and poor old Iqbal and his organization have to compromise between the landlord, mediate and ensure. But there are other problems associated which we haven't chatted about, but on another occasion we'll chat with Iqbal. I had him here some time ago. We were chatting on other issues, but the subject is so vast that it becomes a universal problem in the country.
100%. Both parties have a responsibility. The landlord has a responsibility, the tenant has a responsibility. There's a contract that's in place. Everyone, be it the landlord, be it the tenant, needs to ensure that they meet the requirements of the contract, and then both parties are happy, and inshallah, there will always be some form of disputes or whatever. But the big challenges and big issues which we have seen over the last few years in particular, it has escalated, and not necessarily because of people being willfully wanting not to pay. Circumstances have changed. Whether COVID saw it, people became unemployed, did not earn. And in those circumstances and those instances, landlords also need to be a little bit more compassionate and cognizant of the issues that tenants do face and take that into account. But there are instances, and I'm aware of it, and where people, unfortunately, they know the way around the law. They know how to manipulate the law and abuse the law, and it can happen both ways. So, but the key is there are agreements in place, there are responsibilities in both parties. The aim, and as Muslims in particular, we know whether there's an agreement or no agreement, you know that your duty as a Muslim is to meet your obligations, whatever it may be, whether you're being a landlord or whether you're being a tenant. Lastly, just in terms of, I think, we always talk about how things, what's happening, and I think the economic news that has been coming out, and there's been a bit of more positive momentum coming through. Inflation numbers came out today, slightly lower than expected, which is good. That means hopefully the cost of products and services are slowly stabilizing. Oil prices are coming back. So hopefully if that trend of oil stabilizing and if you get a strengthening rand, we've already seen, I think in the last 2 months, we've had some decreases in the petrol prices. If we can see some of that continuing over the next few months, it bodes well, firstly for our back pockets, but also in general for companies out there. Their profitability improves. That means they employ more people. That means they pay better as well. So, inshallah, I think we're moving in the right way. It's still early days with the new with this new GNU, but I think they're making the right noises, and hopefully we'll start to see some improvement over the next couple of months.
Shukran for those advices, Hassan. My final take, on this matter is that our businesses need to get involved in provision of social housing for tenants facing difficulty. I know in the past a lot of corporates were involved in providing staff housing for their staff so that they have subsidized rentals. There are subsidies available for social housing. It's not difficult to form social housing institutions and to access subsidies. All one needs to do is find suitable land for rental housing development. There is what we call a project-linked subsidy that will enable social housing institutions to develop rental units, and that subsidy will reduce the rental. So if corporates and businesses, get involved, even if they provide 1,000 rental units in combined, that will at least provide some form of accommodation for our people out there. So I think everybody needs to come to the party to contribute for the provision of housing opportunities for our people and work closely with government. I mentioned we need to empower our civic associations and ratepayer associations because we have a challenge ahead. Municipal elections are coming up in 2026 and we have to be civic activists. And as Iqbal EDCV mentioned, that he's been an activist for more than 40 years and many of us have been in that space. And it's part of Deen to provide this humanitarian aid for our people that are battling. On that note, we thank our guests that joined us this evening, Brother Dr. Faisal Sulaiman, Dr. Iqbal Muhammad, Hassan Mutala, as well as Prof. Devanaga. My final comment is that, Allah is in control. We always turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in good times and in difficult times. And we have to consider the plight of our people in Palestine, and they've been reduced to nothing. Everything's gone, as Iqbal was, Dr. Faisal Sulaiman was mentioning. We must thank Allah for whatever ni'mat He's given us, and we must also make du'as for those that are less fortunate, and turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to keep up with our ibadat, our salah, 5 times salah, our zikrullah, our tilawatul Quran, and the best amongst us are those that assist those in need. So we have to consider that in whichever way and form we can get support from business to assist our people to do the humanitarian work that Iqbal is doing and all the other NGOs. Let's get involved and keep in mind that people need our support and assistance. And in that way, we will contribute towards the challenges that we're facing. We will once again have News in Focus next Wednesday. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
They convinced the world to believe that terrorists look like beards and thobes. Now, as the facade cracks, one martyr after another, the world sees through the broken windows and now knows the true face of terrorism. It wears suits and ties and smiles behind lies.
Shema